Hello and welcome back to my channel. This is Free Abundance. So in today's live video, I'm going to be sharing another book review for a really good historical read that I have been getting into. And I did share kind of a short clip here on my channel, just kind of showing what this book looks like. I didn't really dive into the history that is within this book, what it is talking about in regards to African history in the world of Islam and the Muslim faith across the African continent. So, this is going to be a review for this book here. This is The African Caliphate, The Life, Works, and Teaching of Sheikh Usman Dan Fodio. And this is from the time period of 1754 to 1817. And I'm going to go ahead and read the back here because there's a lot of really good information. This book was written by Ibrahim Suleiman, as you can see here. So I'm going to go ahead and have a look into this book and share here. However, before I do that, I'm just going to kind of go through some of the understandings that I have as someone who is a Muslim revert. I do, immerse myself into the Quran. So I do have various versions of the Quran. I do have the clear Quran, this one, and then I also have the English translation of the meaning of Al Quran by the Institute of Islamic Knowledge. I have spoken a lot about some of my studies into like the foundations and the pillars of Islam. I attended an online institute called Zad Academy, where I learned a lot about Muslim faith, what Aqidah is, something that is very prominent within the Islamic world. Lots of really good information. I did attend those courses, like I said, online and acquired a lot of information into Islam as a whole. I have a lot of other reads as well that I have kind of shared on a lot of my social media platforms. And there's a lot of really good information that I have begun to learn about how significant the faith is, even within the African diaspora. Um, I feel that there is a lot of misinformation when it comes to being, an African American and people kind of assuming that we don't belong in this faith, that it is only, you know, um, open to certain groups of people. So this book just gives a lot of history into Islam, how it was not relatively only brought to the continent through the slave trade. It wasn't, browbeaten into a lot of our people from these Western regions. So it's going to give you a lot of really good information where you can understand what Islam was for a lot of Africans across the continent. Even still to this day, you'll see that connection and start to understand how that plays into the life of the, you know, people within Al Kebalan. So on the back here, I'm going to go ahead and just read this description. So this is the life, works, and teaching of Sheikh Usman Dan Fodio. The scholarly work focuses on the establishment in 1809 in what is today northern Nigeria of the celebrated Sokoto Caliphate, which may well have been the last complete reestablishment anywhere in the world of Islam in its entirety, comprising all its many and varied dimensions, as well as giving the biography of the Shehu and a comprehensive account of the history of his movement. The book also provides an in-depth examination of his teaching and literary works. As will be seen, his sole inspiration and source of guidance in every instance were the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of his messenger, Prophet Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to such a point that he even died at exactly the same age. It is also astonishing how relevant the Shaykh's teachings are, in spite of the clear difference in both time and environment, to the situation of so many Muslims in the world today, and the solution to many of the problems currently besettling Islam are clearly indicated within its pages. So, this is definitely a really good read. This is published by the Taha publishers out of the UK. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to share what the table of contents is going to provide within this book. Lots of really significant information, and just kind of read through a couple of pages just to give some context into what you'll be learning from this book. So in the table of contents here, you'll see we've got the introduction. It will give you the education of who Usman Dan Fodio was, raising his students, building the community. So this is what is going to be within this book. So when we're talking about raising the students, it'll talk about spiritual training, salah, fasting. As many people know, we are, getting very close to Ramadan. So a lot of, the fasting principles and how things are supposed to be run during this month are very prevalent within this read. And it has a lot of really good stuff. It will talk also about the intellectual war, reviving the Sunnah, concerns of the Mujahid, the Jihad, what it means, the Shaykh's legacy. And then, of course, we have the glossary. And what's really nice is it'll also give non-Arabic sources of information here. So you'll see Arabic sources and then non-Arabic sources so that you can understand what you're reading as someone who may not be a fluid and avid, Arabic reader or Arabic speaker, such as myself, someone who is, in the beginning stages of my learning journey. So I'm going to go ahead and get into this one. So in the first half, you're going to have the foreword. So it'll kind of just give you a look into this book. So what I'm going to do, because the foreword is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pages. So I'm just going to kind of skim through this first page here just to kind of understand what they are starting with here. So it states here in the first paragraph, of all beliefs, ideologies, and civilizations, Islam stands out, distinct and unique in its resilience. No matter what damage it suffers, no matter what opposition and obstacles it faces, no matter how long the time that passes, it always reasserts itself. Islam has consistently and persistently stood on the side of the weak and oppressed, checked the excess of the corrupt and strong, and insisted on the establishment of justice, equity, and fairness in human society. It has thus offered the weak and the oppressed their only real and lasting hope, and presented the corrupt and the unjust with the only real and unflinching curb on their power. The rise and fall of nations and civilizations, indeed, the entire history of mankind, is nothing but a reflection of this reality, which the future of human society will inevitably continue to reflect. And then it'll give you a lot of, excerpts from the Quran. So you'll see different things here. So one of them states here, if it were not for Allah's driving some people back by means of others, the earth would have been corrupted, but Allah shows favor to all the worlds. So it just talks about a lot of the places within the African continent where Islam, where students were learning, and these were not brought from the Arab slave trade, as a lot of people have tried to paint that history as it being, brought to the continent by Arab slave owners and browbeaten into those people. So this is a really good source for facts. So you'll see here in Bilad al Sudan, as in the other parts of the world, this reality has manifested itself in the rise and fall of states and series of jihads the region was destined to see. In the 19th century in particular, the region saw a series of jihads, prominent among which were those led by Usman Danfodio in HausaLand, otherwise within modern-day Nigeria, Ahmadu Labo in Messina, Umar al-Futi in Senegambia, and Muhammad Abdullah Hassan in Somalia, and Ahmad al-Mahdi in Nilotic Sudan. So it definitely gives you a lot of information into specific individuals within these countries and how things were spread across the continent. So I'm just going to read here the second page on this side here. So it states here, of these jihads, that of Usman Danfodio was perhaps the most spectacular and far-reaching and the one with the most lasting effect. It brought the various peoples that made up HausaLand into a single polity, unprecedented in scope and complexity, and gave them the security, stability, and justice they had lacked under the warring Hausa states. The wave of Islamic revival it triggered reached as far as the shores of the Atlantic to the west, and those of the Red Sea to the east, disturbing the geopolitical situation everywhere it went, causing radical socioeconomic changes and building Islamic states of varying sizes and complexity throughout the region of Bilad al-Sudan. Otherwise, a literary term associated with the countries of the blacks, which is the name early Muslim historians gave to the vast region of savanna grasslands lying between the Sahara Desert and the dense forest to the south from the shores of the Atlantic and the west of the Nile Valley in the east. This region has from time immemorial been in constant contact with North Africa, with which it traded its gold and ivory for metal goods, salt, horses, and other such things. Over time, a network of routes developed, linking various locations in North Africa to trading centers in Bilad al-Sudan. Because of this, trans-Saharan caravans, constantly moving backwards and forwards, become common between the two regions. When North Africa became Islamized in the 7th century, the trans-Saharan caravans began to bring into Bilad al-Sudan not only Mediterranean goods, but also, and far more consequentially, the good tidings of Islam. Once the message had reached the caravan destinations, it became largely the job of the indigenous populations to spread it throughout the world, or through the whole of this vast region. With its universal appeal and superior culture, Islam easily found its way to all parts of the region. Wherever it went, it generated a cultural, societal, and political transformation which saw the rise of such great states as Ghana, Mali, Songhai, Kanem Borno, and Darfur Funj. So it'll just talk about how Islam grew a lot of these, empires to, accept the good tidings of Islam, the good things that came from it, which I find to be very interesting in kind of, counterintuitive thought when you hear a lot of history making you believe that the only way that, our ancestors became Muslims was through the Arab slave trade, which, clearly is not a true statement. So it talks a lot about, performing Hajj, how they did those things within that time period, how Usman Danfodio, was triggered for the Islamic revival. So it's lots of really good information that definitely puts into context our African history, the Muslim religion, understanding how diverse the Muslim community and the Ummah is, which, is another term for community, is when it comes to people that come from, the African continent. So it'll talk a lot about, Timbuktu. It'll talk about how the Moroccan invasion of the Songhai affected that region in the 16th century. Lots of really good information for anyone who wants to truly understand in whole what Islam brought to this continent. So then you'll have the introduction here, and then it will go through a lot of really good information. And then once you get into the first chapter, it'll talk about HausaLand before Osman Den Fodia and what it looked like. So I'm just going to go ahead and read this first page just to kind of give a look into HausaLand, understanding the Hausa people. History does not allow a vacuum. There is a ceaseless interplay between the forces of decay and those of regeneration. Conditions of seemingly unremitting darkness, such those existing in HausaLand towards the end of the 12th Islamic century, do in fact create the conditions necessary for the initiation of a process of rebirth. However, there have to be positive forces at work to provide the nourishment and atmosphere for a sustained process of regeneration within the dark environment. HausaLand was not lacking in these positive forces. They constituted the self-perpetuating, indestructible factors that kept the fire of Islam burning, even in the overwhelming atmosphere of corruption and degeneration. They included the philosophy of Tajdid, Islamic regeneration, which had been kept alive in Bilad al-Sudan for centuries and was never affected seriously by the triumph of Taqlid, the practice of mixing Islam and paganism. These positive forces also include the philosophy of law, which had always acted as a dynamic agent for change, and the resilient and thriving tradition of learning that had been maintained throughout the centuries. So I love how they're going to go into what, HausaLand looked like before Islam was rebirthed, because Islam existed there, but there's a lot of history as it used, a term here, Taqlid, which is the practice of Islam and also implementing pagan ritualistic things into the religion, which are not a part of true Islam. So it kind of explains, the history, of Islam was here, but it wasn't being practiced in the proper way that it was supposed to, as it was brought down to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So it's a lot of really good information. It'll give you the philosophy of Tajdid, what that means, lots of Islamic terms. It'll give you history into the philosophy of law. Lots of really good stuff. And I'm definitely getting more into this. It will also talk about something really interesting here when we're talking about the different countries within the African continent. It talks about the Timbuktu tradition. As many people, don't really understand how there is a collective and whole experience when it comes to, parts of Egypt, parts of Sudan, and how intercorrelated their histories were. And it wasn't just one fluid way of, worship within the continent. There were, connecting factors that connected a lot of people together, and it wasn't as separate as, colonialism has tried to make it, today. So I'm just going to read through this, the Timbuktu tradition, just to kind of understand what that means within this region. So the Timbuktu tradition, perhaps the most important factor in the resurgence of Islam after several decades of decline in Bilad al-Sudan, was that the Islamic tradition of learning and scholarship continued throughout the period of decline to operate as a living and thriving tradition, producing scholars, jurists, and saints all over the region. The tradition preserved the best of Islam and kept alive its intellectual legacy, strongly enough for any determined reformer to apply it as an instrument of societal transformation. That Islamic tradition was best symbolized by an enigmatic and highly venerated West African city that flourished for at least 5 centuries, from the 12th century AD, Timbuktu. Timbuktu was a city bolstered by piety, and as Dr. Hoonwick tells us, it was the proud boast of its people that worship has never been offered to pagan gods within its walls. He quotes Muhammad Khati, who described the city in Tariq al-Fatash. Religion flourished and the Sunnah enlivened both religious and worldly affairs. In those days, it had no equal in the Sudan from Mali to the edges of the Maghreb for soundness of its institutions, political liberties, purity of customs, security of life and goods, and respect for and assistance to the students and men of learning. The city owned its prestige and its immense influence on the subsequent history of West Africa, to its being a center of learning. So it's really nice to understand, what Timbuktu really was, the connections between Timbuktu and Bilad Sudan. Lots of really good history that anyone who is interested in learning about, Al-Kabalan's history, Muslims within that history are very important and pivotal to this continent. So it's definitely good to understand because you'll start learning things from a different perspective and understand that there was more of a unification than there was a, degenerative kind of denigration of its people moving as one force. So this is a really, really good book that I'm getting into, and I'm hoping that anyone who is looking to understand the African continent more will definitely pick this one up because this is a really good read. You'll learn a lot about HausaLand. You'll learn a lot about, kind of the negative things within the Hausa society at that time and why they were really pushing for a rebirth of Islam. It talks about membership of the Muslim community. Lots of really good stuff. So I definitely would, recommend this book for anyone who wants to learn more about Islam. Being that it is, the month of Ramadan, I'm definitely immersing myself in historical things that can, allow for me to understand more about this religion and how diverse the Ummah is and why a lot of these separatist beliefs do not exist within this religion because it was very inclusive of all people from all walks of life, all, tribal affiliations, wherever you came from, you came together under one belief system that we all came from the same creator. So I think that is a really, singular understanding and understandable fact that, you can understand when it comes to Muslims. So I definitely would recommend this one. The bibliography has a lot of really good, I believe these are names of authors. So they do have, like I stated in the beginning, non-Arabic sources. So you'll see here, there's one read here called The Western Sudan from the Moroccan Invasion. You'll also see books like The Rise of the Sokoto Fulani, The Life and Works of Uthman Dan Fodio. Lots of really good books where you can learn specifically out of this continent, how was Islam being spread across the continent, how people took it, how people, used it, misused it, misunderstood it, understood it. Great things to learn being a Muslim. So I definitely would recommend this book. I did purchase this one, I believe, online. I will have to gather up the link where I purchased this one from, and I will definitely share it in the description. However, I also, as I showed in the beginning, I do own two, Qurans. There's a lot of really good information that you can learn about the religion not being someone who feels obligated to become a part of the religion, but for anyone who wants to understand, you know, our country and our world and understanding different points of view, it's definitely important. And it's also important, even in Islam, for people to learn about other religions, even if it is Judaism, even if it is Christianity. Still understanding all of this information is what is going to allow for you to live your life with not only religious tolerance, but understand that there is no man that is superior to another by way of what God has ordained for his creations. So, a lot of really good information that I have obtained. I have used the Why Islam platform. This, pamphlet here talks a lot about human rights and, justice being the focal point of Islam is a huge part of the religion and understanding the right of justice. As you'll see here, the rights of justice in this section here. It'll talk about dignity and equality. Dignity is a huge, formality of truth that a lot of people don't truly understand. What is dignity? How can you attain dignity? So it'll tell you what that is under the scope of Islam and other belief systems who use the same modality of treating one another with respect. So definitely give this video a like, comment, subscribe to my channel for more DIYs, recipes, and reviews. And again, thank you so much for watching.